Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Opening Bell Pod. Hope you're well. Hope you've had a tremendous weekend. Hope you're feeling the joys of spring, though still a little chilly. There is the warmth and glow and promise of the future just around the corner. That's what this time of year is all about. Loads to get our teeth into this week. We'll reflect on all the boxing, or as much as we can cram in. We can't always do all of it, but we'll reflect on plenty of the boxing over the weekend, up in Glasgow, in Liverpool, and stateside as well. We're going to continue our talk about the heavyweights because we're reflecting on Bruno from 1992. Yes, Frank Bruno on his comeback trail, looking to make a charge towards a world title again. Now we're talking about Bruno against Jose Ribalta. First up, though, we're going to talk about a newsline that's probably on everyone's lips, in everyone's ears, featuring someone who has been at the heart of mainstream boxing in recent years. Yes, folks, that is the news that Matt Christie might be moving to paddle.
Oh, that was good. I didn't see that one. I didn't see that one coming, Alex.
The evangelical pickleball king himself may be flirting with paddle. What is going on here?
So the gym where I play pickleball, they've had some new pickleball courts laid. They've also had 3 state-of-the-art paddle courts installed. Previously, you couldn't play paddle there. Pickleball is increasingly difficult to go and have a session because it's so popular. So I thought I'd try paddle, and I've had one game. I was appalling, but I'm going to persevere with it. But I also played pickleball over the weekend, and as things stand, pickleball is still far closer to my heart than paddle.
Okay, so it's only a flirtation, folks. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry at all. There are 2 big news lines. Lawrence Okolie failing a test or testing positive ahead of his fight this weekend against Tony Yoka in France. Was really looking forward to that battle of sort of 2 former Olympians, 2 amateur talents. But Okolie testing positive. I mean, TBC, more to be confirmed, but that's a shocker.
Yes, it is a surprise. So we're talking now. Tuesday morning, I saw the news 20 minutes ago, really. So I haven't had any chance at all to kind of phone anybody or get any extra information. As things stand at the moment, we're waiting on an update of whether the card will go ahead. Obviously, the fight won't, or one would hope it wouldn't. But I suspect that by the time people are listening to this, they'll have more information at hand than I currently have. But very, very disappointing from Lawrence Okolie, particularly at this stage of his career. And it just shows you, doesn't it? You know, I'm sure if you'd have spoken to Lawrence about people that failed tests a couple of weeks ago, you wouldn't have got any indication that he might be about to. But it does. I think on the one hand, as we've said before, in situations like this, that it shows to an extent that the testing system is at least flagging people that are failing tests. And given that Queensberry released the information, that the people are then acting on those tests and stopping people from fighting. But it's exceptionally disappointing when you hear this news, particularly if you've spent any time with Lawrence, spoke to Lawrence, followed his career. It would appear that, we don't know what it appears just yet, but the writing is on the wall.
If it is worst case scenario, this positive test for Lawrence Okolie, if it is, and at this stage we have to assume that it is, if it is worst case scenario, then it does underline, Matt, that you just never know, because this will shake Joe Gallagher, friend of the pod, a firmament of British boxing, that you just can't be everywhere at all times. You can't know everything at all times. Someone like Joe Gallagher, who has been anti-doping in sport, particularly in boxing, that will shake Gallagher to his core if this indeed turns out to be true.
It will do. Last time I spent any time with Joe was out in Bangkok at the WBC convention when Joe was lobbying for Okolie to get a title shot, or at the very least get a final, have his name as in a final eliminator in the heavyweight division. But he was kind of going backwards and forwards with Lawrence. There was a time difference, but Lawrence and Joe don't spend all of their time together. And I think there's been a long-going kind of argument. Well, surely if the fighter's taking something, then the trainer will know. You don't want to speak too soon, but I would be flabbergasted if that was the case here.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, it does raise the issue of fighters who spend a great deal of time in different jurisdictions. It does raise the spectre of what it is that they're doing when they're away in those jurisdictions. So it does sort of kind of raise that question. Some will say, skeptics will say, it's a red herring in itself. Not a red herring, it's a red flag in itself rather than a red herring. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day when we know more details. The other big news line this week is that Daniel Kinahan has been arrested in Dubai after something of a manhunt. The FBI wanted list, which was posted, as well as that bounty of $5 million or so many years ago, it seems now, Matt, essentially hiding in plain sight to an extent. But Kinahan has been arrested, someone who was a leading figure in boxing up until not that long ago.
Up until 2022, you could say he was one of the most influential figures in the sport, without question, right up there, top 5 most influential figures in the sport. And it was only when those sanctions came along where people stopped working with him, or so we were led to believe that people stopped working with him. And that's what people might be looking at now, is that I don't think, and I've been looking at this case again really, really carefully over the last week, spoke to a few people. I've got a few more people to speak to before I publish an article on it. But it doesn't appear that if there were people working for him pre-2022, as long as all that was kind of as above board as it could be, as long as the paper trails are completely clean and clear cut there, I think they will probably be okay. But if anybody was doing work with him after 2022, they're going to be in real, real trouble now. And the other thing to consider as well, just because people were working with him pre-2022, that doesn't necessarily mean, and of course I'm just kind of taking a guess here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every single deal that was done before 2022 was a deal that was done over the table. If anything was done under the table, if there's any questionable text messages between Kinahan and certain people that suggest they're aware of money laundering, then there could be some repercussions for them as well. But people that essentially, even when people you say, oh well, he's innocent, this is ridiculous, and there was that propaganda machine for a while, largely on IFL TV, where people have been invited to say what a great bloke he is. You're not going to get yourself into trouble for that, but unless there were certain things that you knew about and you were benefiting from with money that isn't being declared. So we wait and see. What I'm fairly confident of, and what I've been told by more than one person, is there is files and files and files of Kinahan's workings in boxing that people are going through. What I've also been told as well is that there is a pretty hefty investigation going on out with Spanish police into various money laundering activities that were taking place back when Kinahan was kind of a really influential member of the sport. So I'm sure there's a few people now that are looking back on the deals that they did with him and are hoping that they were all kosher and above board. But in terms of any kind of fighters working with him as something within MTK Global or as an advisor, likely will be okay. But the amount of people that were kind of involved, and it's more likely kind of people that were brokering deals for him behind the scenes that might now be looking back on it all and just wondering if it was the best idea in the world to work with him in the first place.
So is there a feeling, Matt, that this is a thread that's been picked that potentially could unravel and draw in various strands one by one by one?
Not necessarily. As I say, I've still got a few people to speak to find out a bit more. But I think ultimately, if it was just a case of, okay, I'm working for this person, this is what I'm getting, it's all on a contract, it's all above board, no problem. There isn't any suggestion that there's an association with the kind of the cartel and what the cartel was profiting from. So, when you look, I suppose the most famous people that you're going to be looking at is people like Tyson Fury, for example. I think people like that will be okay. But we've already seen with Tyson Fury, he struggled to get into America. This, I think, the investigations are ongoing, and we won't necessarily have to wait until Kinahan is found guilty himself before further people are called in for questioning.
Interesting. So we'll watch how that unfolds, unfurls, and to report on it and give you updates as and when we can. Other couple of news lines from last week, Matt, that I just wanted to follow up. And one from last week that kind of ties into this week. And that is, I mentioned the TNT sort of dazzling The Fight over in the US has maybe been a sort of development, a new sort of brand, new show, new way of presenting the sport over there. And that kind of links into a news line that's been revealed this week. And that is the kind of Saudi Entertainment and Leisure Authority, SELA, that the sense that Live Golf, this has been threatening and simmering, bubbling for a while now, but it seemed to come to a head this week, the idea that Live Golf might be coming to an end, and therefore where the areas in which the Saudis want to invest and put their efforts and their money might be changing slightly. So Live Golf under threat. They put billions and billions in that for pretty much the odd million or two coming back in terms of revenue each year. So there is the wonder now about whether or not they're all in with Zuffa. And there is the wider idea about how committed they are to boxing, because it's not just sport. They're investing in entertainment and media stateside in a big, big way, in Hollywood in a big, big way. So it might appear that sports is lower down the priority list now, and therefore that could have a knock-on effect for boxing. So a couple of related strands in terms of the wider landscape for the sport.
Like I've said, for the last few months, this is just a situation that we monitor with great interest. We can't possibly know where this is all going to go, but I thought it was fascinating to hear that the Saudis would appear to have cooled their interest in golf. And the only reason for that it will be because it's not returning any money for them. Anybody that works in boxing has heard the amount of money that has been spent in the sport, the purses that have been paid, the stadiums that have been built at short notice, or everything is lavish. The ring awards, the purchase of the ring, the appearance fees just to make it appear that there's an A to Z of boxing legends at ringside for certain events. This is all eye-watering money that could not possibly have attracted anything like it in returns. It simply couldn't. It is spunking money left, right and centre. And one would think that however much money is there will come a point where someone of sane mind will go, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep throwing money at this, because you look at the events, particularly the ones out in Saudi, they're not well attended. You look at the numbers that they're supposedly doing on pay-per-view, they are not generating anything like the income that could justify the outgoings for these events. You look at the pay-per-view numbers for a fight as big as Fury Usyk, the first one, not great at all when you think about supposedly that was the biggest fight to be made in the sport. So at some point, and I'm pretty sure we've said this, at some point, someone at some point surely is going to say, we can't keep doing this. And I think if you just kind of look at the evidence that's out there with what Turki Al-Sheikh is producing compared to what he was planning and shouting about, say, 12 months ago, the output has slowed. Now, whether that's been because someone has got his hand on his shoulder and saying, Turks, you've got to slow this down, pal. This is just not working for us. Or it's a conscious decision to slow it down to the point that it completely stops. We don't know. But as you say, you're quite right to look at the other kind of entities that have grown essentially from the ground and whether they are now going to be deemed profitable enough to continue on their own back. Your things like your Zuffers and things like that. I don't know. But the amount of money that has been spent in boxing, and certain people will say this is wonderful for boxing. In the short term, we had some really, really good fights. In the long term, it's altered the landscape to the point now where you're hearing about small hall promoters in the UK saying, I can't do this anymore. Exist small hall promoters that are deciding to continue saying, it's impossible. We can't do this for much longer because there has just been so much focus on the A-listers at the expense, in my opinion, of everybody else in the sport.
Well, closer to home and at that grassroots level, there are some green shoots and news that TalkSport are linking up with Black Flash, Pat Barrett's promotional arm as well, to bring sort of more local grassroots boxing. So there is still some hope out there, and that is at least good news, Matt, for the sport, but particularly for Pat and his team.
Yeah, definitely great news. And the more of that we get, the better. It honestly, like people that kind of follow boxing might be surprised to hear exactly how much other boxing goes on that just does not get noticed. And I'm not just necessarily talking about professional boxing. There's all the amateur club shows and things like that that are going on that deserve a bit of attention. But of course, it's one thing trying to give it the attention. It's another getting everybody to watch and listen.
And actually, it was the old ABAs, wasn't it? It was the amateur championships at the weekend, the finals up in Derby on Saturday and Sunday. We should say well done to Brodie Stevenson, Carlisle's Brodie Stevenson, Dean Jobson, who's a patron, got in touch with us. Thanks, Dean, for your continued support. We really couldn't do it without you. So thanks to Dean. Thanks to Simon as well, who got in touch via the Patreon message board. He was saying his first fight he ever went to was Brodie against Injin Chi 2, the fight we covered last week from This Week in History. So thanks to Simon for that. And thanks to Dean Jobson as well, who's actually one of the coaches up at that Border City amateur boxing club in Carlisle. They'll be absolutely cock-a-hoop because Brodie Stevenson, she won a national title at the weekend. So they and she will be absolutely buzzing, Matt. So you're right. Boxing goes on at all sorts of levels, but thanks to Dean for his support, and well done to him, the team, and Brodie, because that's a big result for them.
It's fantastic. It is. It's brilliant. But that kind of, again, that is wonderful. In their world, that is everything, and I'm genuinely so pleased for them for that achievement. I want everybody to know about it. What was it? Few decades ago, where you would have the ABAs on the BBC. And everybody would know about it, and people would be watching because they wanted to see the stars of tomorrow. But yeah, fantastic news.
You'd have thought in this day, I mean, that sort of stuff often gets screened live on YouTube or via England Boxing, but you'd think now with the scramble for content, Matt, there would be a place for that somewhere. You'd have thought, even if it was a DAZN or wherever, you'd have thought there is a place for that now.
I've spoken to people that represent certain broadcasters, and there's people that represent the major broadcasters that we're familiar with over in this country, and each of them adore boxing and share our philosophies on boxing and want as many people to see boxing as possible. They've had some problems trying to get things like this to screens and to get eyes on it, because there is a concern that, to be perfectly honest, not enough people will watch.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's a shame. Just briefly, do you follow the sort of Okolie boxer public spat fallout last week and the week before? A lot of he said, she said, they said, we say about sort of contracts and where they're at.
I did follow it. I followed it for a day or so. I saw the announcement from Okolie where he came out and he was on the attack against his promoters, saying essentially that he's not getting the opportunities. His career has gone stale and he is fit and ready. I spoke to, or I had text messages with Ben Shalom very briefly at that point, and he said that's simply not true. And he thinks that someone else is kind of getting in Okolie's ear and posting things for him. I think we do know that Okolie turned down an opportunity in the fairly recent past that was offered to him, a decent opportunity. I think it was it an IBF eliminator or something like that, and he turned that down. And there has been further suggestions that quite simply Okolie hasn't been fit and ready. But it is one of these where you really need to sit them both down and have a chat to them to get to the bottom of it, because it's a he said, she said. It's a classic boxing he said, she said.
Yeah, and I think there just might be a danger now with Okolie of him disappearing in the Congo for long spells. I think that late call up to fight Joe Parker might have turned out to be more damaging and more of a hindrance to his career than actually just a help to his bank balance. There is a real threat that's been more than just a bump in the road for Okolie in terms of his own mindset. I wonder. That's my own thinking.
Completely, it's not. It was a devastating knockout, but it was a quick knockout. It was probably one that was a consequence of one or two punches. So it's the kind of knockout that you probably could brush off and come back from. But I think what you're getting at is that all of those millions that were put in his bank account, and there would have to have been probably quite a few of him to get him over there at like 24 hours notice or whatever it was. I'm not criticising him. I would shut up shop completely if someone put that amount of money in my bank account tonight. You wouldn't see me here next week. I'll tell you that. I don't blame him, but I think that is the reason. And the thing is with Okolie as well, is it's quite frustrating because there's quite an intriguing heavyweight picture developing, and Okolie's name has been mentioned as a potential rival for Moses Atoma.
Well, I was going to ask you that next, because I'm hearing July 18th is when Moses is going to be back. I know you messaged me previously suggesting you thought July. Okolie has been mentioned. Ergovic, if he came through Dave Allen, has been mentioned. Well, what do you know about Moses? Because he is coming back July 18th, I'm told.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, that's the date that they've got for him. It's all kind of penciled in. They're trying to find the right opponent. As far as I'm aware, Martin Okolie was within that conversation, and a fit and ready Martin Okolie, I think, would be really good opponent for Atoma. A fit and ready Martin Okolie, nobody could say that Atoma was kind of taking baby steps with that one. Hrgovic was in the conversation. Hrgovic was also in conversations with Zuffa Boxing. And he then went to his existing promoters, Queensberry, and said, look, what can you do for me? They've turned around and they've gone, okay, well, we'll give you this fight and then we'll look to move you on. And this fight, and that the initial fight had to be a fairly kind of lucrative, winnable affair. And there you go, it's with Dave Allen. And then I think the hope is that Hrgovic will then kind of move towards either an eliminator or something of that nature. Whether he deals with Dave Allen quickly enough to then be, whether it's feasible that he then fights in July, I'm quite doubtful. Not necessarily that Dave Allen will give him problems, but just that he will then just want to get straight back into camp and fight someone like Moses Atoma, to be honest. But yeah, that's the situation there. We'll see. But the people in the Moses Atoma business are working very hard to find as close to the perfect opponent in all aspects: marketability, toughness, ability, for the next time out for Moses.
Does it make you wonder who is the right opponent now for Moses Atoma? How do you? It's still the same discussion we've been having pre and post fights for him for the last year or so, isn't it?
I think it's a given. I think it's a given, and this is something else to consider as well. This is something else to consider that was pointed out to me, and it's prevalent because we're talking about Martin Okolie and potentially the dangers of having millions and millions of pounds. As things stand, Moses Atoma is still a very, very young man who hasn't yet earned a supersonic purse. We also need to make sure that he keeps his feet well and truly on the ground when he starts earning that money. Because that's something else to throw in there. We've already spoke about how will he cope when he gets hit clean by a big puncher. How will he cope if he's taken 8, 9, 10 rounds? Another one is how will he cope when he is essentially earning superstar wages? We don't know. That is something else to consider. However, let's presume for now that he keeps his feet on the ground and the focus that he's got is retained. I would think with Moses is that we can say that he is at world level and he is probably more or less ready for a title shot. I think what the clever thing to do at this point would be work out a time frame, and I think I've said this before, work out a time frame is when realistically he's going to fight for that title or he's going to be ordered to fight for that title. Okay, we've got 12 months. How many fights can we have in 12 months? And what different kind of opponents and what different kind of tricks can be taught in those 12 months within those 3 fights? That's the way I'd be looking at it.
Okay, naughty question, devil's advocate question. Do you think if that threat hadn't come from Zuffa or that offer and Ergovic maybe moving on to pastures new, if that hadn't have been in the wind or in the air, do you think Queensberry would still be advocating or pursuing a different route for Ergovic and for Moses?
Very possibly.
Diplomatically put, Matthew. Diplomatically put. Your channels to Queensberry remain open. Now, Pierce O'Leary, August 1st, Dublin, I'm hearing. August 1st, Dublin. So they sampled a bit of that atmosphere. What did he sell? 3,000 tickets on his own in a few weeks or something like that, O'Leary. So they've got a little taste of it. Frank Warren promised he wanted to come back. Looks like he's going to deliver.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Makes complete sense. If he's selling out arenas over there, if that's where he's popular, if that's where he's earning money, that's where they can get bums on seats. And keep doing it. Keep doing it.
Right, let's talk about the action then. Nathaniel Collins went in against Cristobal Llorente in Glasgow on Friday night and was undone down the stretch again. This time, though, it mattered on the cards. Of course, it was a squeaker last time and a draw when they met. And that despite the fact he put Llorente down in the 6th round. He might be the sort of guy that's easy to damn with faint praise because he's not flashy, he's not smooth, he's not a stylist, but there's something very effective about Llorente. And again, that shouldn't be faint praise because there are lots of things he does and he does very well. Whether they can take him to beat a Bruce Carrington, for example, remains to be seen. This fight was a kind of step along the way towards that. But it was Llorente, if not winning the golden ticket, at least booked himself a seat on the bus.
There's always a temptation when you are someone like Nathaniel Collins, who I think was 17-0 before he kind of found himself in the ring with Llorente. And then at the end of it, in a bit of a surprise, we were expecting Nathaniel Collins to win that first fight. Really highly regarded for justifiably so as well, Nathaniel Collins. But he comes out of it with a draw. And then the presumption is is that he made some mistakes along the way. All he needs to do is go back and learn from them, and he comes back and he puts it right and he wins the rematch, and on they go. So it's very, very tempting to make that immediate rematch, presuming that the up-and-comer, the favoured fighter, will just be able to make it all okay in the second fight. Now and again, what happens is that the opponent is all wrong for them. The opponent was underrated from the start, and regardless of what they might be able to do in a training camp before the rematch, they're still not quite going to get the better of that opponent. And I think that is what happened here. As you say, Laurenti, deceivingly good, deceivingly effective. Very, 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 very hard to beat. Nathaniel Collins now will be gutted. And as I say, I think it is sometimes tempting to take that immediate rematch when you're so highly regarded and all of a sudden you have a blot on an otherwise perfect record and you want to clean that blot off as soon as possible because it's niggling away at you. Sometimes the best thing to do is just move on.
And do you think he needs to move on at super feather?
I would say so now, looking at that, yeah.
I wonder if that's the fight that tells the tale. Anyway, Laurenti will move on. You sort of feel he's not world class, don't you? But you never know. You never know. On the same night, Royston Barney-Smith sparkled to move to 16-0, and John Joe Corrigan. Well, we only got a little bit because unfortunately Harvey Hodgetts, who he put down while he put him down, injured his ankle, so we didn't get a chance to see any more. But Royston Barney-Smith and JJC, they were both sparklers on the undercard on the night, so look out for both of them. Next, on to Liverpool on the Saturday, where we had obviously no Morrell against Callum Smith. Callum Smith got injured. It's not just going to keep him out for a little bit. It will keep him out for a little bit longer. Not career ending, but enough just to sort of punctuate the tail end of his career, which is a shame, isn't it? Because I was looking forward to that one, Matt.
Yeah, it is. It's a real shame. It is a real shame, and full credit that the show went ahead in the end. But there doesn't seem to be any indication that that's going to be rearranged soon. This is us kind of acting on like live news coming in. Let me just update on something that's just come in while we're sat here recording. And I think it's only fair to do that because given what we said about Lawrence Okolie with a lack of information, he has released his own statement, and he says this. He says, before anybody starts imagining the worst, following my bicep injury last year, I sustained an elbow injury on the same arm during this camp. I had a treatment on it, and now we are here. I truly hope sense prevails. I will, of course, be fully cooperating with all relevant authorities, and I'm confident any investigation will clear my name. I won't be making any further comment at this time. Thank you for all your support, and see you soon.
Interesting. Okay, so I said until proven otherwise, you assume the worst when you hear a positive test. Okolie has his own explanation, so we'll hear and see where that leads to. Whether Callum Smith still has the time to get back into that picture remains to be seen, but that sort of cleared the path for Ben Whittaker at light heavyweight to strut his stuff, to get his name out there, to further bolster his reputation. And he absolutely did that in some kind of style against Brian Suarez, who he stopped with a sharp right hand to the side of the head. Those sort of quick power-punching reflex shots, those highlight moments are becoming a thing recently for Ben Whittaker. What did you make of it all and the way it unfolded?
He's been impressive for me throughout his career in all but one fight, and that was the first Liam Cameron fight, where his performance really surprised me because Ben Whittaker is someone that from his days as an amateur that I did think was all of the things that he's kind of saying about himself. I thought he was one of those characters where actually, yeah, he's something special, and we're going to sit back now and we're going to witness it. And I think I said something similar when I was on Sky Sports just before the first Liam Cameron fight. Maybe that's why I haven't done a great deal of work for Sky Sports since, to be honest. But yeah, I've always been a believer in Ben Whittaker. Not saying I'm necessarily a big fan of when he's appears to be disrespectful. But I think as the whole package, Ben Whittaker is he's very close to being the superstar that people are saying he is. I'm not quite going to lose myself like Eddie Hearn did in the post-fight interviews. And I think that is a nod to kind of almost some relief with Ben Whittaker's performance. It couldn't have been a better performance. And given what's happened with Eddie Hearn recently, with Conor Benn walking away, and that all of a sudden there might be a new ready-made British superstar that he's got on his books, and he just delivered in the ring and he did it in scintillating style. I can understand why Eddie Hearn was acting like the way he was acting. But as for Whittaker, I think that the link up with Andy Lee, although a lot has been said about it, I think the link up with Andy Lee is an absolute masterstroke from Ben to kind of put his trust in someone like Andy, who is one of the best coaches of the current era, in my opinion. I think Andy Lee, the way that he kind of views life, views the sport, is benefit to all that he teaches. And there just seems to be kind of this newfound spite with Ben. He's not gonna, as people have said, he's not going to play with his food anymore. He's in there and he's going to get it done, and he's going to swallow them up if they can't cope, and that's what he's doing.
Well, that line actually came from Terence Crawford, didn't it? A meeting out in Saudi where Crawford said to him, "You're good. You've got all the tools. Stop playing with your food." So that came from Terence Crawford, and it's a kind of Crawford American style thing to say, but it cuts right to the heart of it. And in truth, we've seen the effect of that, or the inspiration from that for Ben Whittaker, in truth. And there are shades, and only shades and parallels with Moses Atoma, I think, with Ben Whittaker, in a couple of ways. One, again, and just an honest, wondering question rather than a dig or anything else. But like I asked you with Atoma when he was up in Manchester, how many of those people were there to see him, just wondering about the crowd, where his brand is at, where his career is at, where his followers are at. There is an element of that with Whittaker as well. He did sell a decent crowd when he headlined in Birmingham previously, so you've got to say that's blossoming. But it was a Liverpool show, and people had bought tickets to go and see Callum Smith and the McGrail brothers. And the fact that the McGrail brothers were still on is the main reason that show still went ahead, rather than necessarily because Ben Whittaker then became the de facto top of the bill. Let's be perfectly honest and fair about that. However, like Moses, he has the flashy skills, he's got the talent, he has you dreaming, he has you wondering. And like Moses, you can see the future and you can start dreaming about it. And like Moses Atoma, if he can just learn enough, be guided in the right way, then he could be the last man standing when an aging division starts to move towards stage left. And it could be exactly the same scenario as Atoma's looking at heavyweight. It could be the same for Whittaker at light heavyweight.
I don't think Whittaker has ticked as many boxes as Atoma. I do also think it's quite natural to get more excited about a heavyweight than it is a light heavyweight. And obviously we're wowed by Atoma's brilliance because he is still only 21. Ben Whittaker's a lot older than that. You kind of mentioned the Liverpool show. I think we have to mention Molly McCann as well. Molly McCann was a huge ticket seller, and I think a big reason why that show went ahead. I think the way that they almost treated her supporting role as a main event with the ring walk and the introductions and everything else that she got, I think that was a nod to her appeal in Liverpool. And I also think in regard to Ben Whittaker, I think it's a difficult one to monitor his kind of nationwide appeal, because it was quite short notice for when he was elevated. What was it, about 2 weeks before he was elevated to top of the bill? So I think if you're a Ben Whittaker fan and you're based in Birmingham, previously you may have thought, well, if he's not top of the bill, I'm not going to go up. But tickets are expensive. Travel is expensive. Overnight hotels are expensive. that with 2 weeks to go, certain people may not have been able to make the financial arrangements to go and support Ben Whittaker. Had it have been a big showcase that they'd known about for 2 months, it might have been different. So, but I hear you. Yeah, I completely hear you. But I do think that Ben Whittaker will develop into one of those fighters that people will want to see, regardless of whether they're from Birmingham or not. But he was. I think that I'd be super, super excited as well if I had him on my books. And as you say, I suspect what they will do now is start to put some recognisable names in the opposite corner. It's all well and good bringing in people like Suarez and saying, "Oh, he's really tough. He's really tough. He went into the 10th round with Lyndon Arthur." Well, maybe we now need a Lyndon Arthur, so we don't need to keep explaining who people like Suarez are in the opposite corner. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Ben Whittaker. But there's most certainly enough rivals in there. On the broadcast on Saturday, they kept talking about Anthony Yard. That is, I think, an admission. If Anthony Yard is up for that fight, like we're told he is, that is an admission from Anthony Yard that he's nearing the end. He is nearing the end, and he knows that he will go into that fight now probably as an underdog. But I think if all parties are willing to make that fight, that's a terrific next test for Ben Whittaker. And people like David Morrell were calling out Ben Whittaker. Now, we know why Morrell was calling out Ben Whittaker, because otherwise he's not going to get paid. So he needs to stay on that bill. So he looks down, he's like, hang on, Ben Whittaker's on that. I'll fight you. David Benavides has also mentioned Ben Whittaker's name. And Whittaker's comments beforehand saying, well, these guys are mentioning my name because they want to pick me off before I get to my peak. There's probably some truth in that. There is probably some truth in that. But for all of Ben's bluster and appearing so cocksure and big-headed, there is also someone in there who's still really keen to learn. And while his feet are still on the ground, he is listening to everything. He's listening to everything that Andy Lee is teaching him. And he seems to be getting better and better. Let's retain that context that we always do on the opening bell. It was, how do you pronounce his name? Brian, is it? Brian Suarez. He was tough at a certain level. Yes, he had dropped Lyndon Arthur a year or so ago, or 2 years ago over here. Nobody would mention him as one of the top 20 light heavyweights in the world. Not a soul would have mentioned him as one of the top 20 light heavyweights in the world. So Ben Whittaker, really, if he is going to go on to be the best light heavyweight in the world, that's exactly what he should have been doing with that opponent.
Absolutely. And let me stress right here, right now, I'm not putting Ben Whittaker in the same bracket as Moses Atoma before people start throwing stuff at at their laptop, at their phone, at the dashboard of the car. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are some strands and some similarities, but mainly the idea that they could both be the last man standing in their respective divisions if it's handled appropriately. And I think it's important to stress as well that, that first Liam Cameron fight, that is still there. Up there in the ether, or in the forefront or the back of our minds. It is still there. And people are still wondering, was that just a red herring? Or was it a red flag deep into the soul and the mind of who and what Ben Whittaker is as a fighter? In other words, is that exit door part of his makeup, or was that just one night where he had an excuse and things didn't quite work out? And that's there. And that's a question that still has to be answered. And it's perfectly fair to post that. Perfectly. And we will find out. We will find out. I don't know the answer to it. And I'm not massively curious or querying it, particularly with a fighter who's learning and going along this rocky, bumpy road that is the sport of boxing. But we will find out. We will find out about that. And that box will either get ticked or it won't.
We will find out. And that's it, isn't it? And these, I mean, the noise around that first performance around Liam Cameron will quieten down the more performances he produces like that. But all it will take is for him to have a tricky 10-rounder, and there'll be klaxons being sounded.
And noise is the right word, because I think a bit like, say, Alicia Baumgardner stateside, I think the noise that Baumgardner makes, while to an extent it equates to her talent, I don't think it equates to her position in the sport. And there's an element of that with Whittaker, where the noise is louder than it necessarily should be for someone at his stage of his career. Now, they might be right. Eddie Hearn saying he's a superstar, British superstar in the making, the next big superstar. He's very special. But then caveats that with the line, as we peak, we need to be ready for the big fights. In other words, there's still work to be done. Noise. And there's lots of it around Whittaker, most of it coming from his mouth. And how much of it is justified, I think, is fair to wonder.
Agreed. Completely agree. There is something with him though, where I've got a feeling. It is just a feeling, and it's not anywhere near the degree of confidence I've got with Moses Atama, by the way. But I do have a feeling, and I've long had a feeling with what I've seen, what I've heard with Ben Whittaker, is that he could go on to be something special. But we also have to look at other fighters in the past. You look at where Joshua Buatsi is now, for example. He also came out of an Olympics with a medal. And for a long time, we were waiting for him just to be unleashed on the best. And it never quite worked out for him. But I do think there's a difference in the overall package with Buatsi that there is with Whittaker. I think Whittaker's going to be a lot easier to take to market. So the opportunities will be there for him to be tested. But as I said, I think he does need to be tested. I think we can say that the test that he endured and just about survived across 2 fights with Liam Cameron, he's past that. We can move on from that. Now it's time for some other tests.
And let me just paint the picture finally of the kind of division and what I mean about that changing shape, and it's an aging division as well. Benavidez against Ramirez is coming up on May the 2nd. Now that's up at cruiserweight at 200 pounds. So obviously Benavidez is moving at the moment in another direction, despite his protestations and mentioning Whittaker at the weekend. Morrell still around, Callum Smith. What's going to happen there? You've got Bivol back on the 30th of May. He's going back to Russia against a guy who hasn't fought in nearly 2 years in Michael Eifert, the German. You think, how on earth is he getting into that fight? Well, sanctioning body nonsense, folks. Sanctioning body nonsense. But that's a gimme for Bivol on his return from injury at the end of May. You've got Hutchison Buatsi, Craig Richards, who beat Dan Aziz. He was mentioned a few times in commentary as well. And Zach Parker, who only narrowly lost to Buatsi previously. So there's quite a few British strands, home-based strands for us in the UK that would probably make some good sense, both in terms of names, finances, and marketability.
That would make complete sense. That's what he needs now. It's not like there's no domestic rivals for him to fight, and immediately you put Whittaker in against someone who is a proven contender in the division, who is British. It is so much more sellable than constantly doing this. Well, he's been boxing since he's 3 and he's never been down. This kind of nonsense where you have to sell a mystery name by virtue of their mystery reputation. Get someone in there who's established, who the fans know, and you've got a fairly big fight against any of those that you've just mentioned.
And you were right to mention Molly McCann. It was remiss of me not to put her in amongst all those ticket sellers from Liverpool, because she was probably top of the list. She was pretty good, actually, boxing on the back foot. Another kind of string to her bow against the always eager and energetic Ashley Johnson. So well done to Molly McCann. And sticking with the women's stateside, Baumgardner equally repelled the aggression of Bomiri Shin. Now, she got a lot of criticism, Baumgardner stateside. I thought in the circumstances she did pretty well, Baumgardner. She was always winning that one, although drawn into a fight a couple of times. And Shadisa Green lost her her title to the Kiwi, Lani Daniels, who looked like she might struggle through the first few rounds and then just came on and came on and came on. And ultimately, I wonder if the big right hand that Lani Daniels landed on Shadisha Green, it was right at the end of the first round, and she shook her with that and then wobbled her. And Shadisha Green just, she tired and struggled as that fight went on, more visibly and obviously. And she was rushed to hospital, Matt, wasn't she? In the intensive care unit in New York. She has released a statement, or a statement has been released on her behalf, but suggestion is a bleed on the brain. She said, "I passed out due to bleeding out of my brain," was the phrase that she used. But she said, "I'm in ICU, on the road to healing. I'll be back to get what's mine 100%. Well, that remains to be seen if indeed what she's saying is true. So we'll have to see how that story develops. But that was quite worrying. Thankfully, it seems like we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it does. And a statement that came out spoke to, determination just to get back in there and everything else. But it was quite worrying moments, really, with the brain bleed and everything else. No surgery was required, which is obviously a good sign. But it's the second time in about a month that we've had a female boxer in a bad way in hospital with head injuries after a fight. Now, I just think it's worth us mentioning, in all honesty.
It absolutely is. And it links to the fact that the WBC weren't pushing their title on the line for Baumgardner against Bomeri Shin. And that is because they have a very clear view on 3-minute rounds for women's boxing. Whether you agree with it or not, there is some science. Certainly, there's been some studies in horse racing, for example, where women compete on equal terms with men, about concussion from falls in jump racing and how it affects the female brain and female heads compared to men. And there is some evidence to suggest that there are different reactions and the concussion rate can be higher for women compared to men. So you may not agree with the WBC stance, but there could be some scientific reasoning behind that. And therefore, it is something that I think boxing has to monitor, and is something that not just the sanctioning bodies, but actually the commissions themselves should be monitoring. And New York are particularly sensitive about that since the big heavyweight fight with Nurmagomedov, was it, against Mike Perez a few years ago?
Yeah,
but the New York Commission have been very, very hot on all medical matters since then. So you suspect it is something that they might be looking into a little more closely. But we just generally, I think, need to be up and aware on that, Matt. And I think the sport needs to be as open-minded as it can be with regard to that.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It might just be a horrible coincidence as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we've had weekends. I mean, there was a card, wasn't there, out in Japan last year where 3 of the fighters ended up in intensive care. So yeah, it might just be a horrible coincidence, but it is certainly something that I think that we should be keeping a close eye on.
Big shout out to our sponsors, NAS Medical. They're the leading independent experts in ringside medical care. They provide global medical coverage for pro and amateur boxing events. That's professional and amateur boxing events. Also ringside medicine training and also basic life support accredited courses too. So not just all things boxing. Boxer safety is their priority. That's NAS Medical. You can find them at nasmedical.co.uk online. Thanks to Neil and the team for their continued sponsorship, and thanks to the lovely Patreons as well for basically keeping the show on the road week to week. Without you, we wouldn't be here. It is as simple as that. And we will have a special pod, hopefully this week. I'm just waiting on Reece Lynch to get back to me, but he sparkled at the weekend at the Hydro as well. Had a 3rd round stoppage, looked great too, both in terms of in the ring and his his new haircut, his new fight kit. So we'll ask him about all of that. Just waiting for him to get back to me. I'm hopefully going to speak to him today or tomorrow. So we'll have a bonus pod that should be winging its way to you this weekend. That's part of our prospect series with the Scot Reese Lynch. Coming up next is This Week. And this week, we take you back to the 22nd of April, 1992, the Wembley Arena. It's Bruno taking on Jose Ribalta. Bruno trying to work his way back to world title contention. This was a joy to go back and watch. Now, it's not so much the fight itself, it's everything around it. I was originally thinking we'd do Matthew Saad Muhammad against Marvin Johnson 2, which is another hell of a fight. But we have done so much MSM on this pod that we wanted to look in a different direction. But go back and watch Matthew Saad against Marvin Johnson 2. That is a fight from this week in history. But we're talking about Bruno Jose Ribalta, Matt, and an opportunity to watch the great Des Lynam in action on the BBC. The coverage is just intriguing, fantastic, and off its time.
It really is, and it'll take you straight back there. If you were kind of growing up or you were around when Sports Night was on, and Sports Night might have been a highlight on a Wednesday night on BBC One, this will take you right back to that. There's the theme tune, there's the graphics that accompany the theme tune, there's it's the globe for the BBC that we get to see right at the start. It's a half an hour show. That's it, half an hour, and it's great. Yeah, you got silky Des Lynam there, Lennox Lewis and Gary Mason, the old rivals, are kind of in the studio, aren't they? And you got Frank Bruno on the comeback trail, who had lost to Tim Witherspoon in 1986. Then he'd lost to Mike Tyson in 1989. He'd come back the previous year in 1991 prior to this fight, and he'd beaten John Emmon, which I still remember that fight and just the farcical nature of it, or rather the farcical nature of John Emmon being deemed a suitable opponent for someone like Frank Bruno. And then you had Jose Ribalta, who we are now told is a live opponent. I think Gary Mason says it, Lennox Lewis says it. Lennox Lewis thinks that Ribalta might go into the 8th or 9th round with Frank Bruno. Ribalta was here largely, I think we can look back now and say, on reputation alone. He was coming into it on 3 losses, but he was still respected as kind of a sturdy heavyweight gatekeeper at this point in his career. Ribalta was so tough in a 1986 fight with Mike Tyson, going into the 10th round. He'd taken Tim Witherspoon to a split decision. He was still decent. He was still when I used to look at boxing magazines around this time, I would be fascinated going and looking at the WBC heavyweight rankings at the back of KO magazine or at the back of World Boxing, and they'd list it from 1 to 30. And I'd study every single name in that heavyweight division that was listed as 1 to 30 in the heavyweight division. And around this time, I don't know, I couldn't find any information. I tried, but I would say that Ribalta would have been about 24, 25 around this time. So it was a decent test for Frank Bruno. And after he came out to Eye of the Tiger and Ribalta had come out to You Can't Touch This by MC Hammer, Bruno got the job done.
And it was a motivated Bruno, not just back on the world title trail, trying to get back into contention, but of course, Bruno, who had lost to Mike Tyson inside 5 rounds 3 years before, just under 3 years before, back in 89. He had the eye injury on the back of that with a detached retina, and Ribalta sort of latched onto that at the pre-fight presser, didn't he? And said how that could be a target. I don't think he worded it how he meant it. And Gary Mason picks up on this, actually. How good is Gary Mason as a pundit throughout all of this, before and after? How good is the late Gary Mason at this? Pretty objective, pretty honest, pretty straight shooting, but actually mainly on the money as well, Matt.
He was really good. He was really good, and Bruno at the end of it gets told what some of Gary Mason's comments were, and he gets a bit prickly about it, doesn't he? And Mason and Frank Bruno, of course, were kind of from the same stable. They know each other really well, and you can tell there's a lot of respect from Mason towards Bruno with what he's saying. He's just being honest. What a suit he's got on as well, Gary Mason. A bright red suit. And do you know what else I was reminded of? You got Lennox Lewis next to him. Lennox Lewis, who I love. I genuinely just, as a fighter, one of the finest heavyweights of all time. I put Lennox Lewis top 3 heavyweights of all time. Unfortunately, I wouldn't put him one of the top 3 analysts of all time. And the way that he's talking about this fight is very similar to how he was talking about Tyson Fury, Makhmudov a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
very vanilla answers. Very, oh yeah, it's going to be difficult. Anything can happen in heavyweight boxing. But Lennox, you could tell that he was obviously at the start of his career, eager to fight Frank Bruno, eager to be unleashed. But Gary Mason, I thought, was very, very measured and very thoughtful in his analysis.
He's excellent on this, Gary Mason. The late Gary Mason as well. He died at the age of 48. Wasn't he? He was hit by a van on his bike in London. At the age of 48, Gary Mason. He'd just lost not so long previously to Lennox Lewis in a British and European title fight, stopped in 7 rounds. Lennox was good that night, and Lennox was being good in the ring at this time. But no, he's bottom 3 when it comes to, for a man who's so articulate inside the ring, he is really inarticulate outside of it when it comes to talking about boxing. Yeah, absolutely. But at this time, he's just full of spike, isn't he? I mean, you can see he knows where he wants to go. He knows what he wants. And Bruno is like in the crosshairs. It would come a year or so later in Cardiff, but Bruno is in the crosshairs for Lennox.
Oh, he is, because Bruno he was at this point in time, he was a bona fide household name across Great Britain, bona fide superstar. Even if he hadn't fought again, he would have retained that status. This is an era where you had 4 channels. So, and when I say that, like TV channels. So the people that were famous back then were exceptionally famous because there was only, comparing to now, there were so few of them. Today, there's hundreds and hundreds of people are famous, but they're famous in their own arena. Back then, when you were that famous, everybody knew who you were because you're on one of 4 channels. You're going to be on the certain game shows. Bruno's always wheeled out on the game shows. Everybody knew who he was, and pretty much everybody was just desperate to see him win. He was so emotional after he'd lost, so kind of full of sorrow and self-criticism after he'd lost. It was very clear that his ambition was to be the world heavyweight champion. And the whole of the country knew that that was his ambition. And even though we knew there were people like Evander Holyfield out there and Mike Tyson was out there, we still were yearning for Bruno somehow to do it. And I remember watching this fight. I don't remember the build-up, but back then I kept a diary from when I was 12. I kept a diary from 12 to 17, actually. It does get a bit more interesting when I get to 16, 17, by the way, some of the things I was writing about. But around this point, I'd be writing my diary and I'd be talking about the particular girl at school who I adored and she didn't even know I existed, and I'd be like paining about that. But then all of a sudden, I'd have an entry that would be like, Frank Bruno won, in block capitals. Frank Bruno won. Frank Bruno won. And for this particular fight, I was like, Bruno just knocked out Ribalta, who's really tough. Bruno might be able to do it this time. I remember thinking that Bruno would have half a chance with someone like an Evander Holyfield. I was Bruno at this point. I thought this was and I still think it's true. I still think this was Bruno at his best around this period that culminated in the loss to Lennox Lewis. I think Bruno was at his best. I thought his jab was at his best. We see kind of that looping overhand left that he used to do as well. And I think the perception now with Bruno is that he was very robotic. All you had to do was hit him on the chin and he'd go down. He'd run out of gas after 6 rounds. He was a good heavyweight. He was a good heavyweight, and his right hand would have got anybody's attention around this time. But I also now know that he wouldn't have beaten Holyfield.
No. But on this night, motivated by those comments from Ribalta about the eye, you know, he had the bit between his teeth, didn't he? And he fought like that right from the start. The jab was heavy. He was front foot. He was on Ribalta, and he just never gave him a moment's peace. And it was just inevitable. Ribalta was back foot passive, but Bruno kind of put him in his box, didn't he? Right from the very start, motivated by those pre-fight comments. And you got a sense on this occasion how intimidating a fighter Bruno could be. And actually, there were little nuances. I mean, the jab up and down, he was heavy with that. He can be a bit flat-footed, could be flat-footed, Bruno. But actually, there was little level changes, wasn't there? So just little level changes as he was moving into range. That kind of Josh Taylor move. We just sort of dip the knees, lower the target, and then back up. So you're making yourself a movable target and more difficult to hit. So there were little subtleties in there as well from Bruno. And I watched this, Matt, just imagining a Bruno against Daniel Dubois. And although... because so similar in many ways, you know, muscular, thick set, big, heavy hitters with good, solid jabs. And all the way through this fight, I was imagining that fight. And although I think plenty of people, partly with the recency bias, partly because of the Bruno chin myth or reality, partly because of his gas tank, there will be people that sort of think and would have Daniel Dubois in that. But you watch Bruno in this fight, and the one thing you can think about him versus Dubois is that Bruno is consistent and persistent with the jab and the right hand all the way throughout. And he's, in that regard, he's a bit less flaky than Daniel Dubois, a bit more solid than Daniel Dubois. And I think I'd have Bruno to beat Dubois, but that's up for grabs, isn't it?
I thought exactly the same. Or I didn't actually take that thought process through to who I thought would win, but I was thinking, I wonder how he'd get on with Dubois while I was watching that. And I think there's also so after this he would beat Pierre Coetzee, then he'd go in with he'd have a tough time with Carl Williams over 10 rounds, and Williams at the wrong end of his career there, but still really solid fighter. But it was how difficult he made life for Lennox Lewis before he lost to Lennox Lewis, which I think that's where we see an exhibition of Bruno at his best. We get a glimpse of what Bruno could do. We also got a glimpse that night of how quickly he could come apart. And that, when you're talking about Daniel Dubois, is, well, yeah, I think I like Bruno to win that fight if it's scheduled for 4 rounds. He might stop Dubois in the first 4 rounds. But I think after that, the chances are that he's going to get hit with something. And when it's hit with sort of the power of Dubois, he didn't just collapse, but he would start to unravel in the most ungainly way. And I also think a lot of Bruno's problems were psychological. If he was thinking too much about stuff, I think he could struggle. But on this night against Jose Ribalta, and no one had really done this to Ribalta before. And this is what I remember thinking at the time when I was kind of watching it and thinking, well, okay, I know Ribalta's lost, but no one's really just banged him out like that. And I did think it was quite an emphatic statement from him. And I was surprised when more educated people than myself, like people at Boxing News, like Harry Mullen and people like that, were not so gushing with praise as Bruno as I had been at the age of whatever I was, 12, 13.
Emphatic 2 rounds blowout and dominant from Bruno. Not sure the finish is entirely within the rules, mate.
There was nothing wrong with it, mate.
Nothing to see here. Move on. Bruno. Yeah, it's a bit of a funky finish, isn't it?
Yeah, the right hand though is a heck of a shot. The right
is.
hand that essentially seems to knock him out, but he's
Yeah.
sagging all over the ropes. Rebalta's all over the ropes, and Bruno is just throwing all sorts at his head, including the back of it. It's a curious finish, but the right hand that did the damage. I think, what did Harry Carpenter say? There isn't a man in the world who'd be able to stand up to that, or something along the lines of that. And what I also enjoyed as well, speaking of Harry Carpenter, is their nice little chat in the dressing room afterwards.
It is great. I mean, he does cross the line, Carpenter, between broadcaster and cheerleader. There is no doubt about it. He just stamps all. He can't help himself. The relationship is too deep. He can't help himself. So I'm not criticizing him for it, but you have to be honest about it. And I'm saying it as a fellow broadcaster. He absolutely crosses the line into cheerleader. And now what are they going to say? Is Carpenter's line at the end of it, alluding or referring to criticism of Bruno. They start the broadcast, Des Lynam, saying, if he loses tonight, it's almost certain that he'll retire. If he wins, then he can go on to challenge for a third world title. That is the context for all of it. So the payoff line at the end is kind of feeding into that. So in a way, it is really good broadcasting, all told. And that's the stuff that I'm interested in. But he does cross the line, Carpenter. But the post-fight interview's terrific. And Bruno is so sharp and funny, isn't he, in those post-fight interviews?
He is. He is so sharp and funny, and that's kind of made me a bit sad, to be honest, when I was watching it, because I've seen Frank being interviewed more recently, and he's not that sharp these days, that's for sure. And I presume that is a consequence of the sport. But yeah, he was. You could just see why he would be TV gold. Why, if you're producing a game show and you need to get a selection of celebrities on there, you could imagine the meetings saying, "Can we get Frank Bruno on this week?" He would be right at the top of the list of the people that they would want to get on those game shows. It's if you don't remember it, it's hard to explain, because you can't put it into context with today's media. I think anybody that was a kid or a teenager around that time and has got kids themselves now, the difference between kind of the way families would just sit down and watch things, whereas now kids want to watch their own thing. They're watching stuff on YouTube, or they're watching it on TikTok or whatever. Back then, if the parents were like into something, the kids more or less had to be by default, or at the very least they'd know who they were. Everybody knew who Frank Bruno was back then. Everybody. He would have been stopping traffic at that point. And I don't think there is a level of celebrity like that now today, purely because there's just so many different outlets for it. And
further sort of highlights to it being a completely different kind of media age, different social age as well. A couple of pointers. The anthems, no booze for the American anthem, first of all. No co-commentator, just Harry Carpenter on his own. And in between the action, the crowd are really quiet, aren't they? Relatively. Now, that wouldn't always be the case, but in the British sporting occasions, particularly in sports like boxing. But yeah, you think of you listen to the sort of crowd in between the action, or in between the little moments when it really gets exciting. So that's quite interesting as well. And if you want to know where Dan Aziz got his kit from, watch this fight. Exactly the same. Dan Aziz's maroon velvet shorts. Bruno comes in with a maroon velvet robe, maroon and white robe. Dan Aziz absolutely taking his gear from Frank Bruno and making no apology for it. Actually, the kit of Jose Ribalta, it looks like he's borrowed a clown's curtains, doesn't it?
It's weird. It looks... I mean, once he's stripped down to his shorts, those shorts are very kind of Marks and Spencer swimming shorts circa
pajamas,
circa 2005. Kind of pink stripes. I much preferred Bruno's outfit.
Unusual, very, very unusual. On this bill, by the way, Gary Jacobs. What a career! What a hard career what a hard match career Gary Jacobs had. I mean, he'd sort of challenged at a high level prior to this. He would lose a European title till afterwards. And then he'd go on to be a European champion before he fought, but went the distance with Pernell Whittaker as well. Scotland's Gary Jacobs on the undercard here. You can see Mickey Duff in the ring with Frank Bruno. Of course, it would be Frank Warren when he won the world title against Solomon McCall 3 years later. And to give you a bit of context, sporting context for this particular time, Manchester United had just lost to West Ham that day, which meant that down the stretch, they were going to lose the last renewal of the old First Division Championship to Leeds. Leeds would win the First Division Championship a few weeks later, and then Manchester United would go to win the first 2 runnings of the Premier League title, the new up-and-coming Premier League title, which would be the season after this. And of course, it is World Championship snooker time as well. Jimmy White was on a charge. Jimmy White, within a week or so, would lose the World Championship final in a pretty spectacular comeback or collapse. Jimmy White, who was 14-8 up on Stephen Hendry, would eventually lose that final 18-14. Hendry would win 10 frames on the bounce to become a 2-time world snooker champion. All of that going on in the early 90s, Matthew.
I remember the heartbreak with Jimmy White. Jimmy White was a hero. You'd kind of yearn him over the line in a very similar way to people used to yearn Frank Bruno over the line. And White just kept falling at the last hurdle, sometimes in truly heartbreaking fashion. I remember that West Ham result. I used to follow West Ham, still do to a degree. Kenny Brown scored the goal. And yeah, wouldn't be the last time that West Ham would scupper a Manchester United title charge.
Absolutely, they were a bit of a hoodoo side, weren't they? I think they beat him down the stretch. Was it the year Blackburn won it?
Yeah,
I think they were a hoodoo side back in those 90s. So some memories for you. If you can sign up for the Patreon, less than $5 a month. If you can, we understand, but could you please at least subscribe and follow wherever it is that you get your pod downloaded from? So please subscribe and follow. It adds on users. It makes us more appealing to try and attract sponsors as well. So at least please do that for us. And please listen in again next week. Bye for now.